bosun, pipe him aboard.
Aye, aye, sir.
Fire, dress ship.
Very good, sir. Dress ship!
A Brief History of Man's Maritime Mastery. Chapter 8. Westward, Columbus, to a New World. The thick-set little ship lumbered through the blue expanse, her clumsy bows carving through the protesting foam. The sea seemed almost reluctant to let this ambling ark pass, as if it were aware of the monumental task she was undertaking. Yet, day after sunlit day, she pressed westward before the steady northeast trades. Christopher Columbus, her master and commander, regarded her with a mix of frustration and indifference. He called her a dull sailor, unfit for discovery, and in his surviving writings he never once mentioned her name, Santa Maria. To him she was simply the ship, a vessel perhaps no more than 90 feet by 20, smaller than many a tug. As Columbus paced the small poop deck, his thoughts were not on the ship, nor on her two companions, the nimble caravels Nina and Pinta. His mind was elsewhere, fixed on a passage from the Bible, from the apocryphal second book of Esdras. Thou didst command the waters to be gathered together in the 7th part of the earth. 6 parts didst thou dry up and keep. These words were his comfort, his anchor. If this ocean were indeed only a 7th part of the world, and to Columbus, what other ocean could there be, then he should be nearly across it. Soon, he believed, he would reach the fabled East. Europe would have a new gateway to the riches of Asia, and he, Columbus, would be admiral of the ocean sea, supreme governor of all the lands he discovered, a Don of Spain. 1/8 of all the profits would be his, a legacy for his family, glittering prizes that danced before his eyes. But the reality was stark. More than 3 weeks had passed since the little fleet departed from the Canary Islands. According to the chart of Toscanelli, the Florentine who shared Columbus's convictions, Japan lay 3,000 miles west of the Canaries. Toscanelli was half right. The distance was indeed about 3,000 miles, but not to Japan. It was to an entirely new world. Columbus, however, had calculated the distance to Asia as even less. Old sailors on Madeira had told him of a land far to the west where one of their number had been blown by a storm. An odd storm it must have been to carry a ship that far. Even at an average of 100 miles a day, the fleet should be nearing the fringe islands of Asia by now, Columbus reasoned. But the crew of the Santa Maria was growing restless. They were muttering among themselves, casting fearful glances at their commander. They were an average crew, some seasoned hands, others mere riffraff freed from jail by royal amnesty. Superstition and tradition were all they had in common, remnants of their hazardous calling. They dreaded the ill omens of their trade, sailing on a Friday, finding knives crossed on the table, spilling salt. In good weather they avoided cutting fingernails, trimming hair, or whistling, unless a senior officer did so deliberately to summon the wind. They shuddered if their ship listed to starboard while in port, a very bad omen indeed. A newly joined seaman, hearing a sneeze on his left as he boarded, would rather jump ship than embark on a voyage doomed from the start. At sea, snarled running gear and torn sails were often blamed on goblins. Then there was the Sargasso Sea. Columbus's men saw the strange sargassum weed lying thick on the water, so that acres of the ocean resembled a summer field in Spain. They hauled up buckets of it, expecting roots, thinking it had drifted from land nearby. But as the days passed, the weed continued to surround them with no sign of land in sight. The crew's initial smiles faded, replaced by growing fear. The sea must be getting shallow, they thought. Danger was imminent. They sounded with the deep-sea lead. No bottom. Their fears deepened. What lay ahead in this uncharted ocean? What new terrors awaited them? The journey into the unknown was beginning to weigh heavily on the crew, their superstitions fed by the endless days at sea. But Columbus, driven by his unwavering belief, pressed on, unaware that his quest for Asia would soon lead to a discovery that would change the course of history forever. There were times when the wind failed, leaving the ships becalmed in the vastness of the ocean. and the men began to moan in despair. How could they ever return to Spain without a good wind? It seemed that nature itself was against them. But then, as if in answer to some silent plea, the wind returned, filling the sails and pushing the ship onward. To Columbus it was nothing less than divine intervention, a sign that God was guiding their way. Yet the wind, though welcome, always blew from the east, and this only deepened the crew's fears. How could they ever hope to beat back home against such constant winds? Food and water would run out, they whispered, and they would perish in this bleak, endless ocean. Columbus, ever the steadfast leader, tried to calm their fears. He began reporting their daily progress as less than what his own calculations revealed, hoping this small deception might ease the men's anxiety, making them feel that they were not so far from home after all. Still, the wind blew from the east and northeast, relentless, unchanging, just as it does today in these latitudes. Day after day, the little ships stumbled onward, rolling, creaking, and slowly pitching as they were driven farther and farther from Spain. The sails thinned, the cordage chafed, and the figure of Columbus grew more intense, more driven, his resolve hardening as each day of western progress took the crew deeper into the unknown. Columbus was no stranger to doubt. For 7 long years he had fought against naysayers and skeptics for the chance to make his voyage. He had appealed to John II of Portugal, the grandnephew of Henry the Navigator, only to be dismissed by a commission of experts who scoffed at his ideas. Undeterred, Columbus turned to the court of Spain, where he spent another 6 years pleading his case. He argued again and again that the East could be reached by sailing west, all the while enduring the scorn of scholars and learned men who found his theories ridiculous. Who did this fumbling Genoese upstart think he was? They ridiculed him, insisting that the admiral's ideas could not possibly be true. Some say that in desperation to refute him, they even dredged up the old belief that the world was flat. But Isabella of Castile, who ruled Spain alongside Ferdinand of Aragon, saw something in this tall, red-haired adventurer that others did not. Isabella had much to be grateful for in 1492. The Christian forces had finally captured Granada, the last stronghold of the Moors, who had occupied Spain for nearly 8 centuries. Perhaps the Queen, in her moment of triumph, saw in this mystic mariner a chance to achieve even greater glory for reborn Spain, to extend her influence and spread Christianity across the seas. Whatever her reasons, Isabella granted Columbus the support he needed. The enterprise of the Indies, as he called his plan, was finally backed by the Spanish crown, setting the stage for a journey that would change the world forever. The crew's grumbling grew louder, threatening to erupt into full-blown mutiny. By October 10th, they had reached their breaking point. No more Westward, they demanded. They were ready to cast this Genoese madman overboard and turn the ships back toward Spain. But Columbus, with an iron will and a voice that still carried authority, urged them to hold on just for a few more days. Just a little farther westward, he pleaded. And then, on October 11th, the ocean beginning to speak to them in new signs, weeds, driftwood, and a branch bearing fresh green leaves floated past the ship. At these signs all breathed again, wrote the chronicler of the voyage, as Bartolome de las Casas would later record in the mid-16th century. Hope flickered once more among the weary sailors. Then, on October 12th, 2 a.m., Rodrigo de Triana spotted over the moonlight-bathed endless sea a shadow on the horizon. Was it a cloud? No, it was solid, unmistakable, growing larger with each passing moment. He cried emphatically and possibly emotionally, "Land ho! Land ho!" The cry echoed across the decks, a cry that lifted the hearts of the men who had long since resigned themselves to an endless, watery grave. Pinta found land and made the signals which the admiral had commanded. They took in all sail and kept jogging, waiting for a day. So Columbus reached San Salvador, the outermost of the Bahamas. As dawn broke, he unfurled every flag, donned his most splendid attire, and stepped onto the sandy beach with all the pomp and ceremony befitting a grand occasion. Seamen, who had only days before plotted his murder, now crowded him, their disbelief giving way to awe. He had been right. From the woods, timorous inhabitants emerged, naked and unadorned, their eyes wide with wonder as they beheld these men who, in their minds, had descended from the heavens. There were no grand cities, no signs of the civilization Columbus had anticipated, No one had heard of the great Khan of whom he carried letters of introduction. This island, he reasoned, must just be an outpost. Cathay, the fabled land of riches, must lie further beyond. So Columbus set sail once more, cruising the Bahamas, coasting Cuba and Hispaniola, ever searching for the gateway to Asia. He found wild cotton, strange plants and fruits, and a little, very little, gold. But there were no spices, no silks, no pearls, only unclothed natives who remained convinced that these strange visitors were beings from the heavens. On Christmas Eve, Santa Maria drifted off Hispaniola in a dead calm. Columbus, exhausted, had retired for the night. The sailor at the helm, overcome by drowsiness, handed control to a young ship's boy, a breach of protocol that the admiral had always strictly forbidden. In the stillness of the night, the poor vessel grounded quietly but fatally on a reef, her seams splitting open to the sea. Columbus, ever resourceful, transferred most of the crew to the stockade ashore. Tragically, many of them would later perish there. He boarded the Nina, his favorite of the three ships, and set his course for Spain in mid-January 1493. As if by some divine design, the return voyage was as flawless as the journey out. Columbus followed the ideal route, carried by a favoring trade wind westward, and now by variables and westerlies on his way home, as if the path had been known all along. His return to Spain was nothing short of a glorious triumph. Ferdinand and Isabella welcomed him as if he were a fellow monarch. Those who had once scoffed at him now vied for the honor of his company. Columbus passed through Spain like a conquering hero, reaping all the promised rewards. Within 6 months he was once again at sea, leading a grand fleet of 17 ships and 1,500 men, eager to follow up on his discoveries and finally find the Asian mainland he had so long pursued. Christopher Columbus made 4 voyages in total, each one a quest to solidify his vision of a new route to the riches of Asia. Along the way he stumbled upon more islands, established the settlement of Isabella on Hispaniola, the first European outpost in the New World, and bestowed upon the current inhabitants the enduring misnomer Indians, clinging stubbornly to his belief that he had reached the fringes of the Indies. However, some argue that Columbus was not using a term indicating people from the Indies or India at all, but that from his writing Columbus referred to these current inhabitants of the isles he had just come upon as una gente indios, indios meaning in God, or a people in God. Which is true? We may never be certain. But Columbus, the visionary explorer, proved to be a poor administrator. His ambition, which had driven him across the vast Atlantic, became his undoing on land. Eager underlings, hungry to exploit the newfound territories for their own gain, undermined his authority and spread tales of his failures back to Spain. The whispers grew louder as the Portuguese, following a true route to the Orient, returned home with ships laden with fabled riches Columbus had so desperately sought. His reputation in tatters, Columbus found himself disgraced, but he never wavered in his conviction that Asia lay just beyond the shores of Cuba, just past the land he labeled terra firma, which we now know as South America. On his final voyage, Columbus skirted the Isthmus of Panama, confidently declaring that he was within a mere 10 days' sail of the Ganges River. He was aging, yet his obsession with finding the Great Khan, with discovering Cathay, with uncovering those elusive spices and gold, drove him ever onward. A few more miles westward, he thought, and the treasures of the East would be his. But it was hopeless, of course. The Indies were indeed beyond his reach, more than 10,000 miles beyond, separated by the vast expanse of a continent and an enormous ocean that the Europeans did not even know existed. Stripped of his titles, his health broken, Columbus returned to Spain from his last voyage in 1504. Within 2 years, he had passed away, still clinging to the belief that he had found a new route to Asia. The world was left unsure of exactly what Columbus had discovered, but one thing was certain. He had set Spain on a course that would transform it into a superpower of exploration and conquest, a realm that had once been dominated by Portugal alone. In 1494, the rivalry between Spain and Portugal reached a tipping point, and the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed, drawing a line of demarcation 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Lands discovered to the west of this line were Spain's, while those to the east, including a portion of Brazil, were Portugal's. The rush for gold and glory was on, and in the frenzy Columbus's star had faded. His continents would come to bear another's name, but no one could ever strip him of the triumph of that first 33-day voyage across an unknown ocean. a journey that still stands as potentially the greatest voyage of discovery ever made.